Well, hello again, sports fans. This is my new Z84 flying wing, which I'm hoping to set up for a medium range FPV platform. I've installed an F2S flight controller from Banggood. There's not a lot of information around about this flight controller, and what there is in Chinese. The main attraction for me is that it comes with an integrated OSD and a return to home function. I've had a couple of previous flights of this wing, but I've been having troubles with erratic readings from the altimeter. It's been suggested that this might be due to the GPS antenna picking up interference from probably the Speedy. So I've moved it from the back of the wing to the front of the wing to see if it makes any difference on this flight. The flight controller's got 4 flight modes that need to be configured on 2 channels, and I'm still coming to grips with it. I had intended to launch it in manual mode but got confused and launched it in balance mode, which hadn't been too successful before but seemed to work fine this time. The various flight modes are displayed on the OSD as icons as indicated by this frame. And what I'm hoping for mainly today is to see the altitude here remain relatively constant and certainly not go into minus values. So the plan is to get a bit of altitude and then slip it into return to home mode. So she goes in nice enough and starts to circle, and I keep an eye on the altitude, and everything seems to be okay at this point. The flight controller allows you to enter a home altitude, which I've currently configured to 100 metres. And she seems to be gradually climbing up to that altitude okay. So I'm pretty happy that the altimeter seems to be working okay now. And I decide to see how much power it takes to establish a reasonable rate of climb. So I've slipped it back into balance mode and set about gaining some altitude while trying to keep the current draw down to around 5 amps. I'm thinking about heading for the top of that mountain, but it's at 800 metres and it's all over very rough territory. So I decide to head off to the northwest down this nice open valley to see how it goes before heading for the mountain. I'm heading into a slight headwind, so progress is a little slow. I'm still not really familiar with the flying characteristics of the Z84, so I'm not sure what the optimal climb rate is. I'm messing around with the throttle, and I'm paying some attention to the pitch angle down on the bottom right hand corner of the OSD. So at this point I'm focused mainly on achieving altitude. I'm hoping to get up to around 500 metres before I turn around and make an assault on the mountain. I'm a bit concerned though about the amount of power I'm having to pump in to get that altitude, and I'm not sure how it's going to affect the overall flight time. So about this time I noticed that I'm actually 3 kilometres north of home, which puts me about 5 kilometres away from the mountain. So I decide I better turn around if I'm going to have any hope of getting there, and just head towards it and see how I progress. At least the altimeter readings appear to be remaining stable, so mission accomplished as far as that's concerned. So now that I've got the wind behind me, the rate of climb drops, and I kick up the throttle a bit to try and maintain the climb rate. So it doesn't take long for the increased throttle to start dragging the battery voltage down, and when I notice that I'm down below 10 volts, I decide that I might as well give up on the mountain and switch into return to home mode to see how it goes from this distance out. So she comes home in a relatively straight path, slightly to the north of home actually, and then starts circling around it. I reduce the throttle to see if she'll come down to the 100 metres home altitude that I've set. And the wings remain fairly level while she comes down, so that's a good thing. So I decided to take this opportunity to see how low the lithium ion pack that I've made up will go. From what I've read, the individual cells can go down to 2.5 volts without being damaged, so I'm hoping that turns out to be the case. So she comes down well below the 100 metres home altitude, and I figure that's because I haven't given it enough throttle, so I increase that, and the altitude does start to climb again. The beeping you can hear in the background is the PWM to PPM converter signal alarm, which has presumably gone off because I haven't used the sticks for a while. So once she regains that 100 metres, I start experimenting a bit with the throttle to see what the minimum is I need to maintain altitude. So I'm pretty curious to see what happens as the voltage drops below 9 volts. I'm expecting that as it drops lower I'll have to increase the throttle, but at the moment I'm sitting around 60%, so I'm fairly comfortable that there's some reserve still in the tank. So it's at this point that I start to have difficulty maintaining altitude even with the increased throttle setting. She actually starts to come down quite quickly, and I realise I'm going to have to take it out of return to home and decide to land it manually or in balance mode. As it turns out, I didn't have very long to make up my mind. She starts to lose altitude very rapidly, and I'm forced to flip it into balance mode and give it a fair bit of elevator just to keep it from going into the deck. In the end, I just barely make it back to the strip, and I don't have time for a proper approach. I just decide I'll bring it down into the long grass next to the strip as the safest option. So she comes down nice and soft, and no damage done whatsoever. So it's a bit of a mixed bag. It looks like moving the GPS antenna has certainly fixed the fluctuating altimeter readings. Unfortunately, it looks like I'm going to need to do a little bit more research on how to get the most mileage out of my lithium-ion battery pack. I suspect it's because the motor I'm using just isn't high enough kV to give me the RPM I need when the voltage gets down lower. I've located a couple of mini quad motors that hopefully will deliver a few extra kV without too much additional current draw, so I've ordered those and I'll just have to wait and see what happens.